I have been searching for what most people say just can't be found, but you always find me out.
Welcome to Following the Fire. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the wilderness. Just like Israel followed the pillar of fire and smoke, we want to take a new look at our beliefs and just follow him.
And like Israel, we get it wrong a lot, we get lost a lot, but we're doing our best to go where God leads us. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
Can't compare with what you're worth. And I had been fighting all these battles that I thought you wanted me to win, but you won't.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Following the Fire book club. Anytime you have a first of something, there's always the risk that it could be the last. So to improve our chances, Steve and I decided to bring in a ringer and invite our friend Heather Meyer to join us.
Hey, Heather, I don't know if you've ever been described as a ringer before?
A ringer? No.
The big guns.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, so Heather, why don't you introduce yourself a bit, tell us who you are, so I mean, people probably know too much about us, but what about you?
Well, so I'm Heather, obviously, not to be confused with Nathan's wife, Heather. Fun fact about that is that my name was so popular for my age group that there were 3 of us in a row in a yearbook, just like the movie in 1989. And I also grew up with a stepsister named Heather, and my brother married a Heather, so I have a sister-in-law named Heather as well.
Do you have a system?
Named Heather?
Do you have a system? How do you?
Well, for the 3 Heathers that we were in school together, like we were right next to each other in the alphabet. Like we couldn't even do Heather B because it was Heather BL, Heather BLA. We were all next to each other. So we actually went by hair color, and we did have, like, we were in pods, and so, like, we were actually in the same classes together.
Wow.
So with my stepsister, I was the oldest, so I was Big Heather, and she was Little Heather, which didn't give me any body image issues whatsoever.
No, not at all.
And with my sister-in-law, it's just we have different last names, so that's pretty easy. Although the fun thing about that is that my siblings and I have different fathers, and they always had a different last name than I did growing up. And so when Ryan proposed to his wife, my brother, everybody was like, "Oh, we always wanted a Heather speaker in the family, and now we'll get one." Because they wanted my name to be the same. So it's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so my super basic bio is that I live here in northern Colorado with my husband, Seth. We've been married almost 23 years and have 3 kids, a daughter who's 20 and 2 sons who are almost 18 and 12.
Holy cow.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah.
But so the interesting thing about me, aside from the name Heather, is that my faith story is very different from your guys's. Could just do the high level introduction and say it's super complicated and leave it at that. But that's kind of hard for me because I'm a details girl. So a lot of my origin story actually plays out in how my faith walk has gone. So I'm going to try and stay on track here, and eventually we'll get to the book. So first, I didn't grow up churched. And it wasn't just like I was unchurched and we had a nuclear family and, 2 kids and a dog and everything. My family was wildly dysfunctional. There was like trauma and criminal activity and just this type of generational poverty that really strips people of their human dignity in both physical and spiritual senses. So it was rough. And moving forward into my teenage years, we moved from Washington State to Colorado, rural western Colorado. And that's significant because it was at that time that I thought, this is the absolute end of my life. This is horrible and awful and I hate it. But really, it's the beginning of my faith walk. So long story short, there was a guy. And the super antagonistic and immature boy that I loved to hate the entire first year I was at school there eventually became my friend, and then he became more than that. So Seth's family tree actually intersects with Steve's and is deeply rooted in the Church of Christ faith tradition. So as Seth and I dated, I started going to Sunday church with him, and that's really how I came to know Jesus and the church. And as we've known it, the subculture that kind of comes with it. I was baptized when I was 17, and about 6 months after that, we moved. I came up here to go to school at CSU. We got married extremely young. I was 19. But for the grace of God, here we are. Because we have really done our best to screw it up.
Wow.
So also, in addition to being unchurched, I also attended a secular college, unlike a lot of people at our church here, which is an interesting dynamic. I earned my degree in psychology and have worked at the intersection of social work and community development in our area for about 20 years. And that's really where I started to kind of deconstruct, seeing a lot of the themes of oppression and social justice in groups and othering, and equality versus equity play out. And I wrestled with what I saw, what I knew to be true, and what we actually did in and out of church. So that's, in a nutshell, who I am.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the book.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's nice to have someone who has a very different background than us, because it's I don't know. It's always helpful to remind ourselves that not everybody is like us.
Right.
We may have some similarities, but yeah.
And I just want to jump in and say, Seth, I've known Heather for a very long time. All three of us, really, we've all gone through a lot adjacent to each other and together. And that there's definitely a bond that comes from that. Seth, your husband, is a friend of mine, and I look up to him, and just both of you as you're both passionate people with servant hearts, and also very open, which partially probably comes from your background, right? When you have a background like me, you're protecting an image that may or may not be true, right?
Yeah.
And I've definitely I've looked up to and respect the openness and realness that I think is something I've tried to start to learn, but it's not something that comes natural for me. So
yeah, I am kind of like that freak of nature that comes like second nature for. And my kids have an interesting take on it. My son told me one time, he's like, "Mom, you're like such an open book. It's like an open book test." And we don't even really need it. It's like painful how open you are. And I was like, well, I guess that's good. You're prepared.
Yeah. It's not always appreciated when it's your mom. I can understand that, but I appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Well, today we're going to be discussing the book With, Reimagining the Way You Relate to God by Skye Jethani. Skye is a Christian author and speaker, co-host of the Holy Post podcast, which I have recently discovered and I really enjoy. Author of With God Daily, which he bills as the daily devotional for people who hate daily devotionals, which I just love. When I read the book, though, I had no idea who Skye Jethani was, and I was a little bit suspicious of him the whole time. Because he's got a name I can't pronounce. He was really shaking my foundations with the book. And I flipped to the end, and he had a Master of Divinity, and I was like, I don't know about that. But then I looked at the picture in the author section. This book was written in 2001, and Skye is sporting the exact same late 1990s goatee that my dad also had in 2001. So nice. I was like, okay, this guy's all right with me, and I was fine with him from then on.
Yeah, there's that common bond.
Yeah, exactly. A close friend of mine actually gave me a copy of With at a time when I really needed it. And so what I did is I put it on my nightstand and left it there for about 3 years. But when I finally opened it, I wished I had read it right away. The book really impacted my walk with God. And as I've hinted at in other episodes, I also used this book as bait to get my now wife, my now wife, but then ex-girlfriend, to start talking to me again. So there you go.
Whoa.
There's a backstory there.
I assume that it was like it made you a better person or something. But bait, that's hilarious.
It was both. It was both that I became a better person, but I was still good enough at manipulation that I could use bait still. So here at Following the Fire, we're all about taking a second look at things that we've always taken for granted, and Skye's book does just that. So he takes these 5 ways that Christians tend to relate to God, summarizing each posture with a simple preposition. So in the first half of the book, we learn about the most common ways Christians relate to God, and he calls them under, over, from, and for. And I'll just dive in real quick and summarize those. So the life under posture that Skye presents represents Christians who are fearfully trying to submit to God's commands so that bad things don't happen to them, or maybe just to avoid hell. Think sinners in the hands of an angry God, the famous sermon by Jonathan Edwards. At the core of their universe is what Skye calls the capricious will of God, that they're just trying to not get hit by a lightning bolt. Next, life over God often attempts to take God out of the equation altogether. Surging in popularity since the Enlightenment, when we discovered that nature follows laws of physics in a universal and replicable way. Christians in the life over God posture use God as the source of principles or laws to be applied to their life. So you might think of 5 biblical ways to use your money, or 3 tips to being a godly leader, growing kids God's way, or my personal favorite, the Daniel diet.
What?
You don't know about the Daniel diet? It's
just vegetables or something?
Yeah, it's like, hey, Daniel did this and he got healthy, so we should do this and also get healthy. I don't want to throw shade. You can get your diets from anywhere. But the whole point of that story is not that this is food that is going to be good for you. It's that this food is bad for you, and it was a miracle that he still was strong, right? So I just think it's funny that we're like, we should eat that food too so we can get strong. It's like, no, it was God that did it, it was not the principle, right? So, but I feel bad now about that because there are a lot of people who love that and try it out, and I mean no disrespect, but I do think it's funny.
I mean, if it works, it works.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I can interject, it makes me think of I saw this sermon by Tim Mackey, one of the Bible Project guys, and he was talking about how everybody, like, you've heard about the Ezekiel bread, maybe you've seen it at the store, right? The brand, and
yeah,
he's like, people don't realize that recipe, he was supposed to cook it over poop, over burning poop.
Right. It's like, maybe, yeah.
It's like, hope it's not completely the same recipe, but
yeah,
that's funny.
Yum.
Yeah. So just because the recipe's in the Bible doesn't mean you should necessarily make it.
Yeah. This is another side story, but you shouldn't just flip through the Bible and pick a name like for your daughter or son without like reading some context. So, anyways, but so in the, what is this? The life over God posture, sometimes our desire for practical application has led to a lot of 3-point sermons that kind of fall into this posture. Sometimes people in this posture will even take principles from the world, like efficiency, growth, or effectiveness, and apply them to church things, apply them to God work. And then the next posture, life from God, is more interested in what we can receive from God, things we can get from God, rather than God himself. So at the core of life from God, at the core of that universe is really a consumer. Health and wealth or prosperity gospel is an example of this, but it doesn't have to be selfish. We can be asking God for healing, for rescue, or even for justice. The point isn't whether these Christians are asking for a good or a bad thing or selfish thing. The point is they're ultimately seeking the thing rather than God. They've put something before God. And finally, the fourth common posture, life for God, puts the mission at the core of the Christian universe. So their value to God and the kingdom is what they do for God and the kingdom. And often these people are going to be praised by their churches and their faith communities, but as witnessed by burnout in church leadership or disillusionment or just plain old self-disappointment, when what we accomplish for God defines our value, we can be left feeling empty and confused. All of these postures seek to use God for some other purpose. And in the life for God stance, Christians are seeking him and his mission to gain a sense of direction and purpose. And that's their ultimate goal, is just that feeling of purpose. I think Skye hits the nail right on the head when he observes that much of the work churches and evangelism today is attempting is just trying to move Christians from one of these postures to another. So the fundamentalist preacher with the bullhorn, preaching fire and brimstone, is trying to move people from a life over God stance to join him in the life under God stance. Many pastors and church leaders devote tons of energy trying to motivate their consumer life from God congregation to be a more active life for God mission team. But as Skye's friend asks him in the book, if God's Spirit left your church, would anyone even notice? And this is where Skye presents a better way. He calls it life with God. A life that means, as he says in the book, treasuring, uniting with, and experiencing God in a way that allows faith, hope, and love to flourish in our lives. I found this posture exceedingly attractive, but also very foreign to me and incredibly elusive. So that's enough of me. Let's jump into it. So what did we think of the book? Do the postures make sense to you? And which ones maybe hit a little bit too close to home? Heather, what do you think?
Yeah, so Skye talks about, I've been in each one of these postures at various points in my life, and I totally identified with that. Obviously, with an unchurched background, I was definitely over God starting out. And I would say, starting in my faith walk, being in a very small town and a very conservative Church of Christ, I really started out with life under God. And one of the things that I have been really convicted about recently, as I've kind of been deconstructing like where I am in relation to culture and churches, is, I came out of that under God posture being extremely judgmental towards my own family. And, some of that was warranted because, again, a lot of dysfunction. But, some of the damage that was done through that, like, I'm still dealing with. We just had a conversation, Seth and I, the other night about my mom. And, my mom and I have gone through a lot of tumultuous times. But, and we've kind of reconciled to it, but we're talking about, when they visit, I have a brother here in town, and they generally always stay with my brother. And he was like, they've never stayed with us. And I was like, well, one, we have a really small house and 5 people. But 2, when my mom got together with my stepfather, I was like, oh, you aren't married. You can't stay in the same bed in the same, in my house, because I can't approve of that. And I was just like, really convicted by that and some other behaviors that I did in that under God posture. And, I know, Steve, you talked about in church sometimes that, you used to be the leader of the Young Republicans Club or whatever it was at your high school. And I was just wondering, like, do you feel some of that too?
The under God judgmental stuff? Oh, yeah. For sure. I mean, all 4 of these postures really hit me. I mean, just the fact, the way he just describes them, it's. I forget if I was talking to Nathan about this or not, but you have this. The way your brain works is when you have a concept for something, suddenly you can understand it better. Mm-hmm. And if you can maybe understand there's a thing out there, but if you don't have a name for it, like, you can't put it in a bucket. Once it's in the bucket, you can make sense of it. And so, I grew up mostly with this idea of under God. And I initially listened to this book because I do lots of audiobooks because I'm riding my bike or whatever. And I recently got the Dead Tree version. And he has like little sketches in there, and they're actually pretty helpful. And like, I love the sketch about under God. It's like this triangle that says God on it, and there's like the stick figure like squished underneath it.
Yeah. I feel like I'll let you keep going, but I feel like the guy squished under the triangle, he's like flailing his legs. I wonder if that judgment feeling is when you like also want to have everyone else be squished under the triangle.
Yes.
Like,
well,
I'm bearing this weight. Now let me squish you with the triangle.
Yeah, and when Heather was just saying how she was so judgmental to her family, I immediately thought, well, that's because you were so judgmental to yourself. And that's so true, because I was trying to boil these postures down to like, if this then that statements. And so like, I don't know, maybe I've been around too many programmers or something. I'm not sure. But like the one under God is, if I do the right thing, then God will treat me right. Or God will love me, And
and I think that was the kicker, is that God will love me.
Right.
Because it wasn't even like with this posture, it wasn't even like, then God will treat me well. It was, I have to do the things and he will love me.
Yeah, that's all about doing the things.
That's why it's easy to... I feel like all of the postures probably have their own way to judge people who are not in their posture. But the under people have maybe permission to... They're a little bit more thorny in their reactions to outsiders. And it's because I think that they've accidentally missed that thing, that God loves you always and while you're still sinners. And so it's like Westboro Baptist is a crazy extreme version of this thinking, and it's okay to hate them because God hates them too. But I definitely agree that the self-judgment is equally strong, and the fear that goes along with it, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely like, as I was reading about the under posture, I was like, these are the people where the fear of God, that phrase, came from.
Yeah, it's, and all of these have these little beads of truth and good in them. It's more that they're just taking something and making it above God, which is, what is idolatry. And one of the problems with this, and with me in the underworld, because I've definitely been there, when it doesn't work out, because if you're trying, Skye basically says you're trying to follow all the rules so that you don't get struck by lightning, but really that's you trying to control God by doing things. By I do this, I be obedient. That means you're going to rain on my crops or whatever it is, and life happens, and then it falls apart. And if you feel like you've held up your end of the bargain, which is a silly place to be, but I've been there, you're going to be left screaming at Zeus in the sky, I did my part, why didn't you do your part, you know?
Or if you're really stuck in the under, that you start thinking, well, what did I do wrong?
Right.
And then it's piling it on.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's different as the under posture and the from posture are. They also have kind of the similarity of kind of checking the boxes and that if then with moving into the from posture is definitely like that prosperity gospel kind of feel, like every good and perfect gift comes from above. And like, I don't disagree with that, but I remember specifically, like, there was one night I was at a MOPS group and somebody was just going on and on about, I'm so blessed this and I'm so blessed this. And I had just gone back to work and spending a lot of time with people who were really disadvantaged. And I was like, so to people that don't have that, like, are they just not blessed?
Oh, yeah.
Like, and the woman that was saying this was like, oh, that's not what I mean. And I said, well, we need to be really careful about, saying how God has done this for us as a condition of our faith, because that's not always the way it pans out, and another aspect of that is part of my journey has been a chronic lifelong battle with depression, and we can do this mental health prosperity gospel where well, if you just pray and you really spend time with God and do all the things that God, he will bless you with, clear mental health. And, and I just time and time again have been like, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. When, so I don't think I really talked about this yet on the podcast, but when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, about 3 years ago, 4 years, almost 4 years ago, it's interesting how this life, I wasn't in the posture of life from God at the time. I'm sure I have been in the past, but it's amazing how many people around me at church and other Christians on the edges of my world were so stuck in this that they were convinced that I did something wrong that brought about me getting early onset Parkinson's. And I mean, nobody ever said to me directly, like, what did you do wrong? But like, they would insinuate things and imply that I was praying the wrong way, or if you're not praying for full healing, you're doing it wrong. All kinds of weird things that I never, until I read this book, I never really put it in that bucket of their vision of God is I do the right things or I say the right prayers and he gives me stuff. Mm-hmm. If I do this, then I get this.
Yeah, which is magic, which is voodoo.
Yeah,
right. It's us trying to control the scary forces, and in that under and from, I think when you're under and you don't get what you want, you're going to get angry at God. But one of the dangers with for is that if you do get what you want, you don't need God, and you're like, there's the danger in the pain, but there's also danger in the numbness of the things in life that feel like blessings because they're what you want, but that are shrouding you from what God wants you to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we have this idea that it's almost like if every good thing comes from God, then suffering is our fault or isn't from God. But
Right.
that's, suffering is part of the package.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, this came up with the blind man who sinned, this man or his parents.
Mm-hmm.
Health and wealth definitely has the inverse, which is if faithful people get health and wealth, then is it unfaithful people that get poverty and sickness?
Right.
And, it definitely lines up with even just as individualists or, consumers, we tend to think that rich and beautiful people have done something right to get there. And that, ugly and poor people must have done something wrong. And so we don't want to give them welfare or or whatever. But it's just not the universe that God set up.
Yeah, and I've always been like perplexed by the whole basis of this kind of health and wealth gospel because, Jesus says it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. But yet we're
he
like,
was just joking around.
right? And I'm just like, so where did we get this crazy idea that, if we're super good Christians, then God's just going to bless us and we're going to be, the crazy wealthy televangelists in the world right now. And it just has never made sense to me. But I am a questioner and have been, kind of a cynic a lot of my life. And so I just like, I don't know how that works. Like, somebody explain it to me, because it's like a lot of mental gymnastics to try and make that fit.
And I think a lot of this kind of drives into the over discussion. So we're trying to make sense of this all and just turn it all into a rule. The prayer of Jabez. Yeah, I've got it on my Bible because it was the only black cover in the store, and I've always been embarrassed that I have it. But it's in the Bible, right? And it worked. And so we're taking these little things that are true, like good things do come from God, and there are warnings that God gives to us about the way we should live, and that it can impact, what happens to us, right? There are little pieces of that, but we go into this over posture where we try to. I'm an engineer, so extrapolate. That's where you've got a couple of data points, and you try to draw the whole map, and make it into a principle, and then apply it to other people. Well, you don't fit into my map. You must have done this wrong. I didn't get Parkinson's. I'm and so you should try to be like me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that like with the over God, like, they talk about all the step-by-step formulas and whatnot. And another thing that kind of came to my mind as I was reading about it was, when churches kind of go through the revisioning process and declare a new mission statement, it seems like they're following some kind of, strategy or whatever. And it's like, is this really, like spirit-led, or is this us trying to formalize, operationalize the work that we're doing in the body?
Yeah, there's a frightening amount of writings and books and etc. on basically, like you said, corporatizing church.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while there, like the church growth movement was kind of big. I mean, we've always wanted to grow churches, right? But there was like this quote unquote church growth movement, and it was all about making sure that your church services are slick and streamlined in certain ways for the seeker, and that you have. I mean, the books got all the way down to how the person is greeted at the door, and like how many people you have in the parking lot to guide people to the right parking spots, and all this stuff. It's like, the amount of control that you're trying to exert over the situation. And that's what all these come down to. I don't remember if you mentioned this, Nathan, about how Skye in the book talks about how religion is like people who study religion and stuff consider most religions, like the point of most religions is to avoid what is it? Fear.
Well, it's to deal with the chaos and the feeling that you live in a chaotic, uncontrollable world and you can't do nothing about it.
Right. Yeah. The feeling that you can't control the world and so you're trying to exert control over it in some way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what all these come down to. And the one that I didn't expect to be one of the negative postures that he's going to is the 4.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the good one.
Hit me. That one hit me so hard.
I mean, I've been taught my whole life that's the key, is to do everything for God, right? How in the world can that be bad?
I think there's a reason he put it last, because I can't be the only one that got to that one, and I was like, wait a minute. This has been the whole point of my life and my community and everything that I believe. And what could be bad about being a servant? Jesus is a servant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, from the time I was in high school, I wanted to be like a minister, and I went and did the whole mission work thing, and it's exactly what he describes as far as how the people treat you. It's like, oh, you're a missionary. Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you must be some like holier person than me, or
it's like
whatever.
a professional baseball player or a movie star or something.
Right.
If you're an a cappella, or if you're a missionary, or if you quit I was an accountant, but then I quit my job to be a X, right? Those are stories that we hold up as examples, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So about that, that actually brought a really personal story into mind. In the, for the first half of our marriage, I was a working mom, which at our church was exceptionally rare. I was in a very small minority of moms that weren't stay-at-home moms. And as we decided that we wanted to have another child and felt that calling, we did the math and said, we're not able to pay for 3 kids in daycare during the summers, because our older 2 were school age. And so we were like, we're going to pray. And we faithfully arrived at this decision for me to stay at home. And, everybody at church was just like, we're so proud of you. That's the right thing to do. And I was like, what was I doing before?
That's kind of subtle.
Yeah.
From the outside anyway. I'm sure to you it didn't feel subtle.
Yeah. It was, it was a really kind of interesting dynamic, and all of that to say, so, kind of was like, okay, we're doing things for God. And this was in 2008, and, the housing bubble popped, and I ended up having to stop my job sooner than anticipated, which then changed our healthcare situation, which then made us more broke than we were going to be with, the numbers that we crunched didn't turn out the same. And then as I had Christopher, 2 weeks after he was born, I was rushed to the hospital via ambulance with a nearly fatal pneumonia that ended up costing somewhere in the ballpark of $100,000. And for years, I was like, but we did the right thing. We did this for you. Like we did this so that we could, really effectively minister to our children and to really help raise them up in a godly home. And everything that could go wrong did go wrong, short of me dying, which was a real possibility on the table at the time. And so it took a long time to kind of wrestle through that. And during that time, I really came to identify with the story of Jacob wrestling with the Lord all night in the desert and saying, dang it, you need to give me your blessing, and that's, I'm like, a lot of women are like, oh, I identify with Esther or Ruth or Naomi, and some other female character in the Bible. And I was like, no, I was the one that like sat there and wrestled with God and said, I'm not quitting until you bless me. And, those years were really, really hard years. But I feel like, that was really a time where I kind of made my faith my own, and really instead of like hanging on to like everything that had been modeled to me before, it's like that's when I really started reading on my own. I started to pray on my own, and wept so many tears, but and really poured myself into service to the point that I burned myself out. And as Skye wrote about that, I was like, oh my gosh, like you lived inside my brain. And so I don't know, that part of it, the book I really, really identified with. And I was like, kind of like what you said, how's this a bad thing? And really it's kind of that control. It's like, I'm doing all these things. Look at me, make me feel like some kind of value. Yeah. And, one of the things that really stood out to me is after the postures got discussed and he was moving into more of the with, he said, Skye says that some religions assign value to certain social statuses. And, at that time it was like stay-at-home mom. But I mean, think about it. Like we celebrate 50th wedding anniversaries, like they're going out of style when they happen. That's acclaimed and wonderful. But do we celebrate the women that have been widowed for 30 years and managed to, keep their lives, in a good place and have joy? Or the single moms that manage to do everything they need to do. We don't hold parties for that. And that really hit me. I was like, really the other thing that all four of the postures are missing is feeling like we have a sense of value for what God created us to be, just for who we are. He loves us, period.
Yeah. As individuals, as the things that we were created to be. I think in that four posture, something I thought about, because it's all about attaining purpose through accomplishing things. And then all of us were like, yeah, this is the right thing to do because our culture has told us this is what we should be living for. And that's okay. I mean, there are good things about that. It's selfless, but I did wonder about like, where does that leave the women in churches that don't let women serve in these positions? Because there's a very limited number of roles then that you can fill. You could be a Sunday school teacher or a stay-at-home mom. But that's why single women in our churches, like, what are they there for, right? What, they don't get to attain any of their value yet in this community because we've told them that you either need to be a preacher or a missionary, but you can't be one of those if you're a single woman.
Well, if you get lucky, you get to marry a preacher or a missionary.
Right. Right. You could support them. You could be that, or you can be the stay-at-home mom. But we just haven't. But the sad thing is, those women, or the single fathers like myself, or the divorced, or the whatever, or the accountants, they all have a purpose, and they all have the same value, and they're, it's like the analogy of the body, right? That members of a church are the body, but a lot of these postures, we overemphasize some part of the body. And I don't know if you've ever seen someone with an arm that's 5 times bigger than their foot, but it's not functional. It's not healthy. That's not how a body is supposed to work. But we fall into that same trap. A lot of Christians have.
Yeah, so to go on to that illustration, Seth and I were out a rare night out, and we were sitting on a patio, and this guy, like, sitting down next to us was like this bodybuilder beefcake from the neck down. I mean, like, wow, this guy is huge. And then when he stood up to go somewhere, I was like,
skip leg day.
He has no legs, none. And I mean, this is superficial, and I just was like, oh my gosh, like, this guy has no legs, like, not literally no legs, but like, they're so tiny. And I, as you were saying, the body analogy, the parts of the body, it's like, yeah, you got to keep things balanced, and and really train it together as a system instead of just doing the localized training, because then you're going to be really goofy looking.
Yeah, not only is this posture, I think, detrimental to the church as a whole, but having done mission work, I've met tons of missionaries, worked with quite a few, and I've come across people who they've made the mission their idol. I think Skye mentions that in the book. And they are so convinced that is the most important thing on the planet, is to do this, grow this church in this one little place in Europe or whatever, that they, to the detriment of their children and their marriage and all kinds of stuff. And it's really sad, because not only is their right arm huge, and they have no left arm or whatever, but they just are obsessed with doing this one part of the kingdom. And like you said, these are good things to do, serving God, teaching about Christ, etc. But it's this imbalance that, when that's all that matters to you, that can be really dangerous and hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the real important part of it is the things that we imagine, like in the life over God, the things that we care about, like efficiency or numbers or effectiveness. What if God doesn't care about effectiveness? Like the story with Moses, where Moses hits a rock because God commands him to, and water comes out. And then the next time that the Israelites are grumbling and he needs to produce water, he does the same thing without God's permission, and God is angry at him, even though water comes out and everybody is given water. He was complete. His ministry was successful, but it wasn't what God had asked him to do. Mm-hmm. And in the four posture, like you mentioned, it's the sacrifice for the mission is the good thing to do. So that includes things like you sacrifice yourself. That's how you get burnt out, is when you burn up your reserves more than you can sustain. But it seems like it's the right thing to do because it's all for the mission. But you're not listening to what is God's mission for you. And kind of moving towards the with posture, I had never noticed this before, but even Paul, who we think of as this missionary,
mm-hmm.
when he talks about what is important to him, it's not effectiveness, it's not efficiency. He says all of that is dung
mm-hmm.
compared to the all-surpassing worth of knowing Christ. And then he calls people to do things like stay where you are. He didn't turn people into other Pauls. He went to places and said, I'd like you to remain in that marriage, or I'd like you to remain unmarried, or I'd like you to remain in this town. or I'd like you to remain circumcised or uncircumcised. He was letting them. The point wasn't everyone should be like Paul, and here's my tips for effective ministry. Even he was probably effective because that wasn't the point for him.
Yeah, I think you said that knowing Christ is really what surpasses, and I think as I was reading about the 4 posture, the scripture that came to mind was, "Be still and know that I'm God." And how that was just this moment of acknowledging like who God is, what a treasure, as Skye says, he is to us, and likewise how he sees us as his precious children, that he would do anything for. Sent Christ to die on the cross for us. And I think that in all of the postures, that's the thing that we lose sight of. We lose sight of, who is God, and, the fact that he can't be controlled, as much as we might try to do that. And, so I just was like, just that be still and know and sit back and reflect every now and again, like who exactly you're dealing with.
I love that all these first 4 postures are about us trying to take control in some way or another. And what's different about life with God is that the thing that takes care of your fear is not that you hold on tight. It's actually that you let go. And it's the analogy I gave a few weeks ago about my dad reaching up his hands and saying, "Let go of the tree, I've got you." In this book, it's the analogy of the trapeze artist, and who can sail through the air because the only reason they can do that, and the only reason that they let go, is they know there's someone there to catch them, and God is there to catch us. And so the rest of them are us squeezing our Christian muscle or just doubling down on that control. But what is being presented as this life with God is one where you let go. You let go of the control.
I really love, I totally agree with what you're saying, Nathan, and I love how the move from the control and this idea that you're kind of using God, which is something that I never want to use God. I don't want to do that. But it's easy to fall into. But this idea, moving from the control and using God into this relationship mode, which is really what the with is. Because if I'm back, I remember several episodes ago, Nathan, you were talking about how when you're far away from Heather, not
my Heather,
Heather, your Heather. When you're far away from her, you will be walking along thinking, I bet she'd really like that thing that's happening, or the beautiful scenes or whatever. And so it's like you're imagining that you are with her. And so if you're with God through life, it's much more of a focus on your relationship with him and doing things with him and not for him, which is kind of distancing, or over or under, whatever. They all distance things. And I love just this idea of with that he explains.
It's intimacy,
yeah,
and relationship, and there's things like delight. What? Or these things that are feelings that are so foreign to me. I know I'm supposed to love God, but I don't know why. Right? I don't. And it's because I haven't had those moments to rest and then delight and discover and unite with Christ.
Yeah, and the other thing that this is what was hitting me earlier, is, Nathan, at the beginning you talked about when we moved into with, that it was elusive and it was, really not easy to understand. And I think, for this posture, it is ambiguous. It's getting comfortable with the things that are unknown. I mean, that's what faith is, right? The things that we can't know or anticipate. We just believe that it's going to, work out, or that God is there. He's that catcher of the trapeze artist. And I think that is, something that people really want in religion is certainty, and I think I was just listening to your deconstruction episode earlier today, and Nathan, I think it was you that said, the older I get, the more I want to distance myself from people who are truly, truly certain about things. And the more certain they are, the least appealing they are. And I think that's because in certainty, there's no room for faith. And there's no room to just accept things that could be, that would be. It's kind of a black or white thing, and so much of life happens not just in shades of gray, but like all different colors as well.
And that's one of the big temptations that I still feel toward the under God posture as opposed to the with. Because under God, I've got a checklist of things that I do and I don't do, and I know I'm good. I'm confident. But when you move away from that and have a relationship, kind of, still trying to figure out what that means, honestly, sometimes, but having this closer with attitude toward God, it's kind of wobbly sometimes. Just and the analogy to marriage is perfect again, because I don't have a list of things that like make Christy happy with me. I mean, there's definitely some things I should not do. And I know there's some things she likes, but my relationship with her is not based on a set of rules. It's on I love her and I want to do things for her and serve her and vice versa, and on and on. And this idea of a with relationship with God, it's at the same time frightening because I don't have anything to as much hold on to, and at the same time it's so freeing. One of the things I wrote down about the under God posture is the heavy yoke. This thing
absolutely.
weighing down on you, and it's like a squishing you on, and you can't bear up underneath it because you have to do all these things and be right. But when you can let go of that and have a relationship with God, that's like this freedom that you can. I feel like I can. The more I get to that point, I'm still working on it, but the closer I get to more of a relationship with God, the more I feel like I can think for once, and I can see the beauty in things instead of constantly worrying about if I did it right.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know if you know Anne Lamott. She's a writer. She's very colorful, which is probably why I like her. She's a recovering addict, and she writes a lot on faith. And she has a quote that says, "The opposite of faith is not doubt. It is certainty. It's madness." And this is the part that like really struck home with me, is because like we talk about control, but she says, you can tell you have created God in your own image when it turns out that he or she hates all the same people that you do.
Yeah.
And I was just like, dang, girl, like she just said
That's so
it.
good.
Wow. And I just think, I mean, we talk a lot about controlling God, but we also try to shape him into the image that matches us in our opinions and all of that. And, as you said, as we shift into that with God posture, it is no surprise to me that Skye said, okay, so it requires three things, right? Faith, hope, and love. And part of my deconstructing process is like, I'm not going to do all these rules and require everybody to meet all of these specifications, I'm just going to err on the side of love. You know, like if that's the loving thing to do, that's what I'm going to do. I feel like I can't go wrong with that. And, you know, so as he was like, you know, faith is important to being with God. Having hope is important to being with God. And it's kind of like an alpha omega thing. It's like when you're with God, more hope is created, but to be with God, you have to hope. And, so it's kind of one of those mysterious things that happens. And I was like, yeah, the faith, hope, and love is really what it boils down to for us to truly be with God.
I love the definitions of faith and hope also, because he's talking about faith isn't it shouldn't be your ticket out of hell. It's your way closer to God. Mm-hmm. And it's that trapeze act where you are trusting that God's going to catch you. And so it's a letting go of things. And hope, I like this too, because hope is a really common word in our language now. Man, I hope it doesn't snow tomorrow. He says, hope is not a wish. Hope is an anchor. Mm-hmm. And it's not, I hope that good things happen to me. It's when bad things happen to me, because they will a lot, I have an anchor that I can hold to. That's my hope. Mm-hmm. And man, that speaks to me, because all these things we're trying to protect ourselves from by placing this stamp of conformity, whether it's under or for or under or over, it's all this one idea of the right way to do it. But I think with God, the scary thing is that we are now free to be who we were meant to be, who God knows us to be, and it's completely different from the people next to us. Our hope, though, our anchor is the same, and our faith is in the same person, but we're flipping around and flying around, and delighting in different ways, and it's so foreign to me. This is something that I think when I've seen it in other churches, I probably mocked it. Like, why is this lady dancing over here? Or, or why does this person have their eyes closed and their arms raised and this person is crying? All those things, if I designed church, it'd be a lot of me, and it'd all be the same thing. But I think that God created us and knows us and has a name for us and knows what our identity is, and then is saying, I'm going to go with you and be your anchor through all of this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
In the last chapter, it's entitled Life with Love. And he talks a lot about 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Mm-hmm. And about how it's always a thing that you read it at weddings, and I think we probably had it read at our wedding at some point or whatever, because it's all about how love is so important and love never fails and all these things, and that's fine, that's good. But it's one of those passages that I could probably recite the whole thing, and I've heard it so many times that I haven't heard that I don't hear it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And this idea of following after knowledge and following after the right and the wrong, or the right thing all the time, and focusing on love, it's right there. It's like, he says, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it'll pass away. Mm-hmm. And then he goes on to say, after all these things are gone, these things that you think are so important, this knowledge that you've built up, the fact that you can speak in tongues because you're connected with the Spirit or whatever, that stuff's going to go away, and three things are left: faith, hope, and love. Mm-hmm. And the greatest of these is love. And I don't think that that's like some prophecy for the future. I think that that's how we need to be trying to live our lives in the kingdom.
Yeah, the here and the now.
In the here and the now, yeah. It's not something to wait for. Like someday the completeness will come, you know. Well, you are complete because you are part of God's body. You know, the church. You're part of His. You have His Spirit, etc., etc. And if you can focus on trying to let the prophecies and the tongues and the knowledge be secondary, He doesn't say they're useless. He just says they're going to go away. And focus on love, like you were saying, Heather. I loved how you said that love is so important. As far as erring on the side of love, and that's one thing that has really hit me over the past years, especially when it comes to issues like LGBTQ stuff. So it's like, can you just let these people be themselves and love them? I mean, I don't need to come to them with knowledge or whatever and bang them over the head with it. And I mean, that not just that group of the population, but all kinds of stuff. Whether it's like a church who uses musical instruments or whatever it is, you know, like let's err on the side of let them have their relationship with God, and I will try to love them as much as possible. And especially as I was thinking about you specifically with your work, Heather, with at least in the past, like with so many people who have had hard times, homelessness, you know, poverty, whatever it is. Same thing goes there. We have this feeling that they've done something wrong somehow, or that they need to get fixed before God can love them. I mean, on and on.
Yeah, I really, you know, with people that have had really hard times, I think my reckoning with that was, so my grandmother passed away in 2017, and that I had been kind of reconfiguring my faith for quite a while at that point, but when she passed away, she had a hard, drawn out death. It was very stressful, and she had a hard life, a super hard life. And I will never forget, you know, I went for a run the morning after she passed, and it was raining, and I was just livid with God, because the thing that kept playing through my head was the parable of the sower, and, you know, how some of the soil wasn't good. It wouldn't accept the seed and everything. And because my grandmother wasn't a believer, and I was really struggling with that, you know, like what happens now that she's gone, you know, and I was just like shaking my fist at God, because I was like, she had so much crap happen to her that wasn't even her doing or anything. And that's what hardened her soil and didn't allow that to penetrate. And I was just like, how is that fair? You know? And I think, you know, it was one of those raw moments with God, because, He wants to hear our anger. He wants to hear our, you know, like, dude, what is the answer here? You know, like our perplexities, whatever that word is. He wants to hear our big wonderings. And that's part of being with Him, is working that out. You know, I don't have an answer for that. And I think that was, you know, going back to like the elusiveness of what life with God is sometimes it's just ambiguous, and you just have to be still and realize, you know, I don't have to have all the answers.
There's a this quote that I had quoted, Mother Teresa, where she talks about her prayer life with Dan Rather, and
yes,
and she talks about, he says, I've said this before, but he says, what do you say when you pray? And she says, nothing. I just listen. And he says, oh, sorry, what does God say when you pray? And she said, nothing. He just listens. That was this beautiful thing. But then a listener sent in this article from her death, and in the Washington Post, And it's about how she felt lonely and disconnected from God a lot of her ministry. And in the book, it might be in the appendix, but there's this practice of, and she had even said she wanted to keep that secret. She wanted to keep that a secret, but I wish she hadn't, because that is a part of it.
Yeah.
That I have felt close to God, so close that I don't believe it when I read my journals sometimes. I'm like, what? No, come on. That's not what it's like, right? Because I've also felt that, so that's completely so far that if I pray, I feel crazy, like I'm talking to myself, and lonely because I'm talking to myself. And there's this practice, this old spiritual practice, Christian practice. I think it's called examine. I might be pronouncing it wrong. It's maybe Latin. And it's maybe at the end of the day, you, without judgment, look back on your day. And two of the things you're looking for is, when did I feel the presence of God? And it's not like, what was I doing right? What was the principle that got me there? It was just, oh, God was in that moment. Wow. But you also look back to, like, so that's called consolation, when God was in that moment. But the other thing that you look for in the same day, maybe the same hour, is desolation. When was he completely gone? And that's part of life, of spiritual life and Christian life. And my life, sometimes that is measured in years, and sometimes it's measured in minutes. But I think that's this other thing that struck me, because this is a weakness of mine, which is why I want it so bad. Skye asks some people, and he says he makes it actually a practice. It'd be interesting to try this sometime. He just says, what's your treasure? You know, if you could have anything, what would it be? And every once in a while he gets someone, they'll close their eyes and they'll sigh and they'll say, Christ. My treasure is Christ. That seems so foreign and impossible to me, because mine was immediately a literal treasure. I'll take literal treasure. If I get, I would like to be able to pay off my house and fix it because it's fallen apart, and feel safe and secure by having a lot of money. And if I had that, then I would want a huge list of things. And I don't think I would ever get to a point in my list where I would close my eyes and sigh and say, Christ. Christ is my treasure. But I think that's the gospel. The gospel is God loved us so much that he came to be with us. And that gospel, it transforms people, but it speaks to you if you're an outsider or an insider or a sinner, quote unquote, or righteousness or whatever. That God will step with you through where you are is available if you're LGBTQ. It's even available if you're legalistic and fundamentalist. If you're diving into your bullhorn evangelism, or you're diving into social justice, all of those people that have the same gospel, that God is available. And just like the beginning of the book, where there's this analogy about this beautiful, beautiful mosaic, but that is kept in the dark, and you only get these flashes. That's about as close as I have ever come to this thing. I have seen some flashes, and I have known some people that probably would close their eyes and say, Christ is my treasure. And I want to let go. What I think is, what are the 5 principles to do this? Or like, how can I be good enough to do this? Because I just want to go right back into the postures to get to God. And even in the book, you flip through the appendix, and he's like, here's some things that are helpful. And he doesn't say it sarcastically, but I would if I wrote this book. But obviously, I'm not going to give you the principles because I just told you it doesn't exist.
Right. Do them in this order at this time of day.
Part 1, steps towards, living your best life with God, right? No, it's not it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. Yeah, and I read that part too, Nathan, and I was like, wow, I probably would make fun of somebody who closed their eyes and sighed and said Christ, because I'd be like, are you for real? I would not trust it as, I'd be like, oh, you're, Pollyanna Sunshine Christian, like that you haven't seen hard times. Like, what are you saying? And that's my gut reaction. But then as I sat and think about it, I'm like, I've actually known people that are like that.
Yeah.
And, and I could actually be that. I think part of it that comes with that is usually the people I think of that are in that state of mind and heart is they're old. and so it's like that comes with wisdom, kind of seeing like, well, what really matters in life and who has stuck by me through the test of time. Once you get a certain age, it's like the only thing that has done that will at that point be Christ.
Wow.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, well, as you can tell, I'm a huge fan of this book. I'd strongly recommend people go out and get it. The first chapter is short. It's one of those that if the first chapter speaks to you, then the whole book will. Don't stop in the middle because it does kind of plunge you into a valley before it brings you back up into what life with God can be. If it doesn't speak to you, put it on the shelf like I did for 3 years, and maybe it will. But and it ends. It ends with like, well, now what? Which is as far as I am. That's where I am right now. Like now what? So.
And also, just as an aside, the appendices do have some great discussion questions. So if this would be a good book to like read through with a small group at your house, like a Bible study type group, to discuss this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, thanks for having me. It's an honor to have you, and it really, really adds to the discussion. So great to have you on, Heather. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so next book club, what are we reading, Nathan?
For our next book club, we're going to read Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther, Dr. King Jr. I'm extremely excited to read this. This book contains his letter from a Birmingham jail. And we are going to be joined by a friend of a friend, Nicole Magloire, who has strongly recommended this book because it's just timely and can lead to discussion we really need to have. But she's also committed to reading this book every year. And she says that she wants to read this every year because one day she wants to open it and realize that it's no longer relevant.
Wow, it's kind of heavy.
Yeah, that hit me when she said that, because it's a 60-year-old book.
Yeah, wow.
And I know from reading Letter from a Birmingham Jail this past year how relevant his words are. So I'm excited to dive in.
Absolutely.
I haven't read much Martin Luther King Jr. at all. I know him from pop culture, right? So really looking forward to diving into this book. If you also, by the way, if people who read along, we would really love to answer your questions on the air. You can send us your comments. Send them by Monday, May 17th. You can hit the contact button on our website, followingthefire.com. You can email us. What's our email?
followingthefirepodcast@gmail.com.
And send us your comments, your questions. We plan to air the episode sometime in the neighborhood of June 2nd.
Yeah, and I've added a book club page to the website, too, with links to all the books. Make it easy for people.
There you go. Just head to the website. It's all there. Why We Can't Wait by Martin Luther King Jr. So thanks for listening, and we hope to hear from you.
See you later.
See ya.
I had been fighting all these battles that I thought you wanted me to win.
Hey, thanks for listening to Following the Fire. If you'd like to see show notes for this episode, which includes links to everything we mentioned as well as all the scriptures, head on over to followingthefire.com and just click on this episode. There's also contact information on the website, Let us know what you think about the show and if you have any suggestions for future topics. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you could. It really helps other folks find the show. And as always, thanks to the fabulous Daniel Wheat for the theme song and the music for the episode. You can find more of his stuff on Apple Music and Spotify. See you later.
Don't you know it's all I have? But even on my heart can't compare with what you're worth.